You have to see your tetrachords, Hayes.
Oh man, look at this. You get a gold star for today just for working the word tetrachords into this lesson. I love that. Maybe that should be the title of the lesson.
Hey folks, today we're talking about mandolin again. We are joined by Hayes Griffin. You may remember Hayes from our video that we did that was Don't Be Afraid to Ask These Bluegrass Questions or something like that. It had a good title. It was a great video too. I highly recommend watching it. Hayes, why don't you tell the people about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, folks, my name is Hayes Griffin. I'm an instructor online at mandolinsecrets.com. I kind of am technically the lead guitar instructor over there. Oops, I guess this is the wrong lesson today. But also teach mandolin content with my buddy Magnus Zetterland over there.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that Hayes is a great guitar player and a great mandolin player. Yeah, I am playing the part of the audience today. Hayes is going to be teaching me a lesson about mandolin, and hopefully I won't embarrass myself too much. Hayes, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so today is the one mandolin scale that you need to know. Except for the fact that, like...
I hate that.
Oh, God, me too, dude. Because, like, I was just getting ready to completely tear apart my entire tagline there, too. It's like, if you only know one mandolin scale, then you're doing it wrong. But this is a great place to start. But that's not as good a title for YouTube, right? But today we're going to be talking about kind of my favorite mandolin scale shape to kind of get people up and running. I find that this one particular box or shape is really easy to see a lot of common fiddle tune melodies in and licks and breaks that people play in bluegrass. So it's just a great place to start. And then we can kind of, deviate to the other mandolin scale that you need to know after this one.
I talked to a handful of my mandolin playing friends about this, and they all kind of recommended the same shape. So I'm interested what your take is going to be on this and what you're going to show me, because spoilers, I've already heard a little bit of it, and it seems like every mandolin player uses this, so that's great.
I think the reason that a lot of mandolin players use this one is because there's a lot of symmetry involved in this scale shape, as well as the fact that it only covers 2 strings. So before I do any talking, let me just stand up here and show you fine folks exactly what I'm talking about. So the one mandolin scale that you need to know. Let's start with a major scale, and then we'll tear it down into a pentatonic or whatever later. But if you're playing, let's say we want to do C. C is a great spot to start on the mandolin, right? So if you put your index finger on the 3rd fret of the A string, that's going to be our root note for the scale. And then I'm going to name fret numbers just so we can see the symmetry a little better. So it's going to be 3, 5, 7, 8. Then move up to your E string, and oh my gosh, you're going to play the exact same pattern. 3, 5, 7, 8. The cool thing that we can do with this shape, all the guitar players out there who are familiar with all your content on the channel know that we love to talk about like pentatonic scales and bluegrass scales and all that stuff, right? So if you were to look at this pattern again, but from kind of a pentatonic standpoint, you're just going to remove the 4th and the 7th. That means we're going to play 3, 5, 7, skip that pinky note, then go 3, 5, 8 for your major pentatonic. And I would say that this is kind of the more useful of the scales to pull out of today's exercise. So the major pentatonic pattern, once again, 3, 5, 7, 3, 5, 8.
If you want to get nerdy, right, you could count scale degrees too. 1, 2, 3, skip 4.
Exactly.
5, 6, skip 7. 1.
Whatever way kind of helps you frame it, because I know a lot of folks out there that are, if this is your first time kind of like diving into scales on the mandolin or anything, you might not have a lot of music theory behind you or anything like that. Learning those scale degrees, like Marcel just said, I think is going to be essential for you to kind of applying that major pentatonic scale to some of the tunes and exercises that we might end up talking about here today.
All right, so what if I wanted to continue the scale?
What I've shown you here, I like to call this box 1, and it's a 1-octave scale. It covers 2 strings, but as we know on the mandolin, we've got, and when I say strings on the mandolin, oh my gosh, let's talk about a pedantic conversation, right? I mean one course of 2 strings. You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, right? So we're already in the weeds on this. This box covers 2 courses on the mandolin, right? And like Marcel's kind of pushing me here, there are going to be times where we need to access some notes that are maybe outside of that scale shape, right? So if we do this for C major, the cool thing on C major is that we've already kind of maxed out the top range of this scale, right? We could, shift up and play some crazy stuff up here, but I think what would be more beneficial is, oh man, what if we want to keep going down? You can actually play another box 1, check this out, if you find your root note on that C string. So you can kind of play cascading box 1s all the way up the mandolin. So let's try that again. Your index finger's on the 5th fret of the G, right? It's that same pattern that we had, and you'll notice that if you just move back 2 frets and then start it on the A string, then you've got 3 octaves using the same shape. That's kind of how I would extend the box down. And check it out, say we were going to do the same thing, but starting on this low version of the C, you can extend it up by kind of not using your 4th finger to complete the 1st octave of the scale, but you can shift up.
Whoa. I've never done that.
I know that kind of like puts you into Chris Thiele territory, right? Because you're starting to play all those 17th fret notes and everything like that on your mandolin. But hey, we're on the fast track here, people. That's what we need, right?
Hayes Griffin said it here first, folks. If you want to play in the house of Tom Bombadil, this is the only shape you need, and that's how you do it.
Oh man, I love it. So that's kind of how you find this box on the mandolin and how you can kind of move between octaves of that box 1 shape on the mandolin. What do you think about that, Marcel? Is that blowing your mind right now? How you feeling about this?
No, that's great. I love that you've given multiple options for kind of extending this thing and visualizing how it works. The next place my brain goes is looking at the pentatonic scale. So I'm thinking, right, that was going down the pentatonic scale, and that shape should all repeat here. And so I have 1 repeated note, right?
Exactly. So you kind of have to triangulate where your shift is going to happen. Say you're playing a lick that covers 2 octaves right there. The way that I kind of usually think about this stuff is like, playing up the scale, and then that's my shift spot.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then back down. So I would play that, I always try to get into the next position as quickly as possible whenever I'm shifting. So it's instead of staying in position all of the way and then shifting to the new scale shape, I'm playing the pentatonic scale and not completing the octave, then using that note as like the first note of the next octave of the scale. Now, obviously, we could find a million examples where like that's not what you should do, but generally when you're like practicing with a metronome and learning how to shift through these things at first, that's the approach that I would take.
Yeah, and I hope that everyone sees that the possibilities for kind of switching and combining the scales are like massive, are like huge. Like it could be a slide, right? Right.
The one thing that I always kind of think about is like when I'm descending in box 1, you know what I mean? Like we're talking about, you can kind of like double that note and like slide up into your next position. You know what I mean? Those kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I wouldn't have thought of that either. That's great.
So a bunch of different like you said, pathways through and between the different scale shapes here. But I think that, like you said, you could stick with this box 1 shape for quite some time, especially if you're new to kind of mandolin and mandolin improvisation and stuff like that. And then once you add the other shape that I kind of really like, the one that I call box 3, then it's like virtually every solo or shift or anything that you've ever heard any mandolin player ever do comes down to going between box 1 and box 3 or box 3 to box 1.
I'm looking for patterns and shapes. So I'm seeing no matter how the scale works out, like no matter where my root note is, the major scale pattern works out because it's the same thing over and over again, right? It's always those same fingers. But the pentatonic scale is kind of interesting to me because I get 3 notes on a string and then 2 notes on a string. Kind of like the step of the pattern looks a little bit different. And it makes me think like, let's do this. All right, so if we were talking about the C scale that we were just doing, we end up with 3 notes on this string, on our A string, 2 notes on our E string, right? But if we were playing the G scale, for instance, here's my G root note here, I have 3 notes on the string. And I have 2 notes on the next string. So it's kind of the same pattern, but it's flipped. I know it's going to repeat again too, right? Right? The same logic applies, but the shape is like upside down.
And I love that you kind of, almost like what I would call like slicing the scale in half at that point, right? And viewing each half of the scale as like these interchangeable blocks that you can work with.
You have to see your tetrachords, Hayes.
Oh man, look at this. You get a gold star for today just for working the word tetrachords into this lesson. I love that. Maybe that should be the title of the lesson. The cool thing about what you just described though, now we're moving a little. This is for, we're starting to pump the gas a little bit in this next point that I'm talking about. Maybe mixing and matching scales, right? I think you think about improvisation this way a little bit, Marcel, but I know that when I'm playing through like a bluegrass chord progression, just like a 1-4-5, I'm kind of, generally speaking, thinking about switching to the appropriate major pentatonic scale for whatever chord I'm playing on at any given point in time, right? So say we're in the key of C. A really simple chord progression in the key of C is 1 and 5, so C and G, just like you talked about there. So one really cool exercise that you can do if you split that pentatonic scale in half like you're talking about here, you've got the 3-note version and the 2-note kind of half, is you can use those to switch back and forth between chord changes on one string. And you're just flipping back and forth, right? So for example, say you're over a C chord, you can use the... You know what I mean? Those 2 notes work really well over the C chord, but then for your G chord, you know what I mean? So it's just a matter of adding an extra note up there. Or say you're doing it on this string. There's your C chord notes, but your G chord notes, those ones work better, And then before you know it, you're seeing the whole pattern as it interlocks. So like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden you've got like a really cool closed position way of navigating back and forth between 2 of the really most important chords in the song or genre that you're trying to play, right?
Yeah. That would be a simple improvisation.
There it is, buddy. And the next step beyond what you're doing there, because that's kind of what I call like gear 1 when I'm talking about taking this shape and messing with it. It's just like run your fingers through the scale. Don't try and play the scale just up and down. You know what I mean? Add some randomness to it. Skip some notes. Do whatever, right? But switch into the appropriate scale at the appropriate time. When you're feeling comfortable with that, I think the kind of next gear, like gear 2 of this, is to start to add some embellishments to it, because that's really what's going to make it sound like bluegrass. You've talked about this in some of your guitar lessons before, and I love this kind of approach that like blue notes need a buddy, you know what I mean, or need pals. So if we're thinking about like improvising in the key of C, this is your 3rd, right? If we're looking at that kind of box 1 shape for our C string. So that means that would be our blue 3rd. We can like slide up into that kind of thing, you know what I mean?
Totally.
So then it becomes... You know what I mean? And then you're your basic kind of maybe slightly less interesting improvisation all of a sudden sounds like exponentially more interesting, right? Because you've just added some blue thirds in there.
There's a couple of really cool chord shapes that Hayes just played too. So if you're thinking about, your like C chop chord and your like G chop chord, there's two double stops that, I mean, aren't perfectly out of that shape, but are really similar to that chop chord. And they exist right there for C and G, and I think you used both of them just now in your improvisation. Right.
So the thing that I love about this box one thing is that like we use this idea to kind of just frame in your mind where the good notes lie, right? But we immediately start to deviate from it. And that note that you just added to your root note to make it a double stop is usually the first note that I tell people to kind of focus on when they're kind of moving outside the bounds of box one, you know? Because if you're thinking about it, like if we wanted to attach some theory to what you were just talking about there, that shape is a root and a fifth, right? We've got our
power chord.
Our root note on top. And what's the first chord you learn on guitar? It's power chords, people, right? Why not mandolin? There's our box again, but that note, your middle finger on kind of the fifth fret position on the string below is going to be like your most important, what I would call like almost like bouncing off point for that scale shape, you know? Because you hear people, how many mandolin breaks have you heard just intro like that? Right? And then you can do that for all of your chords. That kind of thing.
So I think for a lot of people that, that's like, oh, like that's the thing I want to do. Just to reiterate, it's these two pentatonic shapes and this one, right, for C and G, and we're adding in the blue note, right, which always appears on your whatever string has three notes, right? You get that note. And then you're adding in these double stops for C and for G, and just with those three things, you're able to create a sound that sounds like that. It sounds like bluegrass mandolin.
Pretty much, and I would hate to like oversimplify what it takes to play good bluegrass mandolin, but right, because we're gonna get a lot of haters out there that are just like, it's not that simple, blah blah blah, and I'm like, yes, but if you're a beginner and you need just like some kind of foothold to get into this thing, or you're even an intermediate player who can play some leads but you don't really know what's happening under your fingers and stuff like that, this is like a really, really, really good way of just mentally framing the kind of scale shapes on the fingerboard in order to kind of set yourself up for better success, right? When you're taking a solo, instead of just like, well, here's a C major scale, I hope some of these notes work,
I always say that the materials are never very hard to grasp. What's difficult to grasp is the construction. So we can all like look at a house and be like, oh yeah, this is like wood and plaster, like nails. But like a lot of us can't build a house, right? So it's one thing to be like, oh look at how interesting, what Hayes played. These are the three things that went into it. It's an entirely different thing to assemble it yourself.
And if we are going to talk about like some good, some good models to follow, or some people who have constructed this exact thing and maybe deserve some attention, I would say the first break that I love looking at to kind of teach this shape and how to move in and out of it, right, would be Ricky Skaggs' mandolin intro on Banks of the Ohio. Like, I think it's pretty iconic, right? Like, everyone knows the sound of that thing. Like, I'm in F. I'm like dancing around that F major pentatonic shape the whole time. And it starts off with that root fifth thing that you just said a minute ago, Marcel, right? And then we get our next big double stop out of this shape. This is one I wanted to be sure to point out today too.
Yeah, I just learned something from that one. That's a one chord.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a one chord, but it's a third in the bass and a fifth up top, So right. That shape is in all of those, And the thing that I love to do with like my students and things like that is just take this break, just take that one lick and put it in every key. That gives you like a rock solid kind of kickoff to any break or improvisation in any key, as long as you can find that, you know. And thanks to Ricky Skaggs for pointing this down that pathway.
That has a lot of big implications. I'm not sure I could demo them all if I tried to play a break over that tune, but your second chord shape means big things. Let's see if I can vocalize all of my thoughts. Let's go back to C and G.
Yeah.
Over here. So that means that if I'm playing right here, this is a 1-chord double stop, but also that's a 1-chord double stop. That means that if this is a 1-chord double stop, that's a 4-chord double stop.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, well, how do I get to that low C? Well, I shift up and stay in box 1, right? You know what I mean? Exactly, dude. And one thing I want to point out, too, that you kind of, maybe you were kind of thinking about it this way, Marcel, but like in that break, when you were switching to the 4 chord, like that, you were kind of switching into box 1 of the 4, right? So like, so that's what you were playing for your double stop on the 4 chord, right? But check this out.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's cool.
So it's kind of like you start to see these overlap points between like what I would call box 1 of your 1 chord and then box 1 of your 4 chord, or box 1 of your 1 and box 1 of your 5. You know what I mean? And spoiler alert to anyone out there who's like watching this stuff, if you were to take a major pentatonic scale for all of your 1, 4, and 5 chords, write out all the notes in alphabetical order, and reduce all of the duplicates, you just get the major scale, right?
Yeah, you do.
So, but this is like what I call like bumper bowling for improvisers, right? Like if you think about the major pentatonic scale when you're firing off a solo, you're kind of removing the problem notes, the 4 and the 7, the ones that sound less sultry over the chord, and you're kind of steering yourself down a path. Now, there's a wide lane in this major pentatonic path for you to just kind of mess around and improvise, so generally everything you play will sound good over top of that chord. But craftily switching back and forth between those pentatonic scales, once again, has those kind of implications, and you're going to start to see those connections on the fingerboard, especially on the mandolin.
Yeah. I got another one for the folks at home.
Yeah.
If you didn't catch this, when Hayes said that I was switching into that same box for the 4 chord, that had another interesting implication, which is that G is here, C is here, and F is here. Right, they're all stacked.
You just literally have to move, like, if you know that the middle set of strings or courses is your 1 chord, right? You go down for your 4 and up for your 5. Like, holy smokes! Like, yeah, you'll never have to think about music ever again, people. Because that's the goal, isn't it?
To not think. Yeah, exactly. Wow. I really like kind of all the things that I'm saying. What kind of tunes do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about like fiddle tunes or like vocal tunes? Where do you want to go next? Because I feel like we got to start building stuff.
I think the easiest spot for people to kind of start to work some of this material out is in the context of vocal tunes. I think it's just so much easier to kind of be, because if you know some basic chop chords, you can chop through the chords to the tune, and then at the ends of your phrases, kind of find box 1 for whatever chord or key you're in, and then play a little fill out of it. That's, to me, that's like the best way to kind of start working this this box into your own playing, right? Playing some fills. There's a tune that Jim and Jesse did called Are You Missing Me that I love. Sometimes I play it in C. I think they played it in a G position, but who cares? We can transpose. This is bluegrass, right? So if we're talking about that, it would be like, the day that I kissed you and told you goodbye, your lips told me that you would wait. Right? Then you just find your little lick there at the end of the phrase, and then back into the second half of the verse.
Yeah, do it again.
Yeah. Let me start over again, because there's starting verses in the middle of them. God, I can barely get the first word out, right? So, the day that I kissed you and told you goodbye, your lips told me that you would wait. Oh, what's the... The day that I kissed you and told you goodbye, your lips told me that you would wait.
You picked this song.
Yeah, but your lips deceived me and told me a lie while your heart was sealing my fate. You know what I mean? And for the people that are watching, like, the fills don't have to be that crazy intense. You only have like 2 beats of space to kind of put something in there. So
yeah.
So doing your blue note, almost like a G run type of lick, that's like a standard kind of thing. Or that's another kind of, or if you've got some open strings like in the key of C, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know that one. That's Doc Watson lick.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
totally.
that's a really simple way to kind of like start adding them to your vocal tunes. But kind of gear 2 from that idea would be to like play a solo over the vocal tune. That's kind of always the second place that I steer people, because playing a fiddle tune, like, it's usually a constant stream of eighth notes. If you're just working out a new idea or concept, that's usually too much activity to like effectively do anything. So what I would say is, like, take a simple tune like Are You Missing Me and try and find the melody inside of box 1, and then kind of play that as your solo and start to add some, blue notes or other little scaly type ideas in the middle of it, So that's kind of like an approximation of the verse melody to that one. And if I were to try and fancy it up a little bit, right, all out of box 1. So you can kind of use your melody as like a little template for a break, and almost in the same way that you learned to do fills on this, wherever there's kind of a long held space in the melody, play a lick out of that box, right?
Right.
Or bounce back and forth between another note. That's one of my favorite techniques, especially for beginners. That root fifth shape that we were rocking, I always tell people to do stuff like that, because if there's a long shape, or a long note, you can kind of create the false sense of activity by doing that rocking and not actually have to play like any other notes.
Well, I noticed that you did that even in your kickoff. You kind of did like, I don't know what you did, but
yeah. There you go, dude.
Mandolin players always do that.
Yeah. So, like, how's that hitting you, man? Does that sound like a pretty good path to send people down as far as that stuff goes?
I love it.
Yeah.
I feel like I want to try it in other keys with different tunes. So why don't we try it in open A?
Yeah.
I'm finding all of my pentatonic scales that would go with this situation. I should probably also find all of my double stops. That makes sense.
Absolutely.
Because like I wouldn't think of that as a D chord, but it is. Right, and that would be also a 1 chord. It's interesting.
And this one gets weird too, right? Because the open position, it to me is a little harder to see the box, just because that first finger isn't on top of your root note anymore. You know what I mean? So like some of these shapes may become a little obscured.
It's worth saying that if it's hard to find just with your fingers, maybe I'll do a scale diagram right here. Everything that we just found is identical to what we were doing for C. We've just scooted it down until it hit an open string. But we're on the same string sets and everything. So you're right, it is confusing because it's an open string. But I feel like if you're looking at a scale diagram, like a fretboard map, I think it's much easier to picture.
It's way easier to picture, and diagrams are obviously the way to go for this. So, like, insert diagram here, right?
I'm gonna play Old Home Place.
Do it.
The last note is so hard to find. Yeah. I played a double stop that you didn't mention. I don't know if this is a thing that you do, but I played this over the E chord because I was thinking about that.
Absolutely.
Did I do anything else weird? I don't think I did. Oh, I played a drill, which we didn't talk about at all, but you got an open string, so you can double it, right?
That's the, like, Mandolin 101, right? Like, if you're playing a note that's on an open string, like, definitely double it. Right, that was like the Bill Monroe approach. You know, he's like, play as many strings as possible so it's as loud as possible. Right.
The melodies are very pentatonic, right? So in my head, I'm thinking like, you know, it's been 10 long years since I left my home in the hollow where I was born, right?
Yeah.
And I've done this on guitar before, so I know how that melody works. I have like a head start, but in your head, if you were doing this at home, you would want to find that really simple melody. And you think about all these double stops and all the like little pieces of melody that you can turn into like 8th note passages, or you can add more notes in between, and that's how you get to the breaks that we're talking about. If I feel like we lost some people. I feel like it's starting to seem like magic.
I think so too, and like, but your explanation there I think is totally killer, right? Because like super simple, you know, say like I didn't think about this, so like let's think about it, right? You know. So, like, there's your simple fence post melody, we would call it, right? And then what Marcel is saying, like, then add some double stops. And usually, like, if say you're an A great place to add double stops is just to see if any of your open strings that are adjacent to the melody note string work, right?
Yeah.
So then you've already got like kind of a sort of decent sounding mandolin type break, right? So it's not like you even have to think about the double stops totally crazy style, right? Then step 3 is add some of those licks like you were saying, you know, find those big long notes, and then is there like a little phrase that you're used to hearing, or can you rock one of those blue thirds into a major third and make that sound nice or something like that, you know?
This is kind of a new thing for me. I'm not sure I had heard anyone say this before. Talking about people struggling to turn simple like quarter note melodies into like busy 8th note melodies. And so we got this like da 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 ba bum. If you can try to sing that with all of the 8th notes, it helps you imagine where all of the improvisation would go, because I'm singing all of these like doubled notes.
Yep.
And you can imagine how that melody can get really busy if I try to improvise it, and in my head, I'm kind of singing it that doubled up way.
Absolutely. Yeah, because what you're doing is just kind of like laying the groundwork for that like eighth note subdivision, right? And then you can kind of manipulate it as you see fit. That's awesome, man. I had never heard that approach before, but I'm going to think about that now.
All of this means that I should be able to do this with more songs and more keys. Using Hayes' knowledge he's imparted on me. So, of course, now I'm going to go to B flat.
Absolutely.
How about Sweetheart, I beg you to come home tonight. I'm so blue and all alone. I shouldn't run into too many part things, right? Hey, stuck the ending that time.
Yeah, dude. And so I'm going to break down exactly what you just played for people watching because, like, that's a genius tune to kind of think about this one on. It's a little tricky, right, because we add that flat 7 chord in there or whatever, so you have to find, like, what's an A flat look like, on your D string. But really, if we can think about it in, like, the box 1 position shift kind of way, so it's, Sweetheart, I beg you. That whole part, you're in box 1 for B flat, right? And then there, like that whole lick, it's box 1 of your 4 chord, your E flat chord, and then you're straight back to box 1 for your 1 chord. And then you did that split box 1, the one with the kind of 2 notes on the low string and 3 notes on the high string for your 5 chord, and you're done. Right? So it's like the same format that we just did for everything else.
And so all of that information should just keep moving up through all of these shapes. I don't feel like I have to do anything in B right now. So do these work out like worse or better if my root note isn't on the A string?
Yes. So I actually kind of wrote out this little rule before we hopped on here today because these are like just tendencies that I've noticed over time. That's a really great question, and we did not even prepare this one, folks. But finding a lot of like common fiddle tune melodies and stuff like that. If we're thinking the key of A, the key of D, all of that stuff, then it's like, yes, box 1 all the way, But as soon as you start to get into like maybe the key of G or the key of C or some of these things, and I'm thinking specifically like fiddle tune melodies, you typically see a shift to this other box that I'm talking about, box 3, the one that starts on your 3rd finger. I don't think I've explained that yet, by the way, but that's why I call these boxes what I call them. Box 1, your root note is on your pointer finger, and box 3, your root note is on your ring finger, which is that kind of.
So this is like Big Sayota. Right. I know where this is going.
Yeah.
I see it.
And then Billy in the low ground, right?
Right.
Right? So all of those, like, the keys where you end up playing root notes on lower strings, you're going to be in that other box. But, like, for example, Whiskey Before Breakfast, like, totally a box 1 tune.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right, it's like kind of like the full major scale version we talked about.
Exactly. So you're going to notice those kind of differences. And I would say generally, too, for like your higher keys, like the B flats, the Bs, like the bluegrass kind of keys, it's really a split between the two. You know what I mean? You start to see a lot of this. You know how I was talking about like recombining your box 3 with your box 1, and that's what really cracks the door wide open? Like for the key of B specifically, the like a low box 3, so like a B chord that's kind of like this, right? And then a high box 1. You'll start to see things kind of out of that position, or vice versa, a low box 1 and then a high box 3.
Oh yeah, right. I understand. Yeah, that was interesting.
So those like sharp and flat keys and closed position keys, we would call them, where you don't get any open strings. That's where you start to get things start to get a little murkier and more challenging with this kind of approach that we're taking here. Box 1 doesn't quite get you all the way there, but Box 1 is enough to give you everything you need to pull off like a convincing solo and convincing fills. It's that kind of thing. You won't sound like Ronnie McCurry, but you'll sound like a decent person who knows what they're doing when it comes to playing a fill or a solo.
Anyway, Hayes, it has been great having you here. Thank you so much for stepping up my mandolin game, and hopefully you've gotten a lot from this conversation too. Hayes, tell the people where they can find you and what you do. Remind them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Hayes Griffin, all of my guitar content is on my personal YouTube channel. Just type in my name, Hayes, Hayes Griffin. And if you're interested in supporting my work, you can check me out at mandolinsecrets.com. There you can gain access to Mandolin Secrets Guitar Club, which is kind of my main website, or Mandolin Secrets Academy. And if Marcel, it will be so kind, I would love to have some links below in the description for you to click your way there.
All right, folks, y'all have a good one. We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Through the valley below, my line was running from town. That midnight train spilled her blood at the cross.